two videos that I want to point you at today. The first one is from Lord Ricketts, who was a former government security advisor.
Well, Trump has made no secret of the fact he wants an early end to the fighting. And I've always felt that he wants to have a ceasefire that he can declare as a famous victory. He, I think, has never been too bothered about what the detail of it is, or whether it would be sustainable, how it would be observed, monitored, what the consequences would be if one side violated the ceasefire. These are actually all points that have been brought up in the hope of muddying the waters and delaying the whole thing, tying it up in a lot of complicated knots. But I don't think that figures in Trump's thinking at all. He's just thinking it will be a declaration of ceasefire, handshakes in the Oval Office, and then off he goes to get the Nobel Peace Prize for achieving remarkable turnaround. But that kind of ceasefire would last days, I think, probably at most, and would very rapidly fall apart. So how long is he prepared to let this run? It's a very good question. He is so mercurial and unpredictable. He could suddenly take against Putin if he felt Putin was jerking him around and not taking him seriously. And we might find a bit as with Kim Jong-un, the North Korean leader. He went to Pyongyang, he hoped to land a big shiny deal, didn't quite work out, and then he immediately veered away from Kim Jong-un, who became public enemy after that. And of course, Putin's trying to avoid that. But I suspect Trump's impatience at some point or other will predominate, and he will say, I've done my very best on this. If they don't want my support, well, then they can just sort it out between themselves and step back from the whole thing, potentially also step back from supporting Ukraine. That's the concern, because then after all this flurry of activity, Ukraine could be left weaker than it was, having to depend on European support at a time when the Europeans can't substitute for everything that the Americans are bringing to the table. So that's the worrying scenario, an impatient rejection of the whole thing, and America just pulling right back from the problem. That's not what any of us want to see. And I think that's why Keir Starmer is working so hard now to make sure that Trump knows that the Europeans are prepared to put serious resources, even including military, into this as part of trying to get a sustainable outcome.
And so that 100-day target that Trump laid out, should we be worried about that if we get to that 100-day target and Trump hasn't got a ceasefire?
Yeah, I think the real target for Trump was probably the May the 8th commemoration of the 80th anniversary of the end of the war in Europe, which is clearly going to be a big commemoration, particularly in Moscow, where this is the crucial moment of their myth, really, or the national story that it was really Russia that beat the Nazis. And I think he'd probably hoped that there might be some grand signing ceremony in or around May the 8th. If it drags out beyond there, then I think this factor of impatience and volatility in Trump could well push things the other way. I don't know, but I didn't. Having watched the first term, he quickly tires of something if he doesn't think there's anything directly in it for him in continuing to work on things, and that could well happen here as well. So there is a degree of urgency, and there is a degree of momentum that actually Trump has generated. I mean, to give him credit for that. And I think that's why European leaders are working so hard, weekend after weekend, to try and develop some momentum on their side as well, to show Trump that it's not just between him and the Russians and the Ukrainians, but the Europeans also have a major role to play here. And Keir Starmer, to my mind, deserves a lot of credit for that, working with Emmanuel Macron, with his Jonathan Powell, his excellent national security advisor. I think they really have put Britain at the front of European efforts in this crisis.
And I want to talk briefly now about the situation on the ground in Ukraine and its impact on the negotiating situation. Kursk and the salient the Ukrainians hold there is still crucial in this for all sides, it seems. Today, Zelensky has denied his forces there are defeated. But is it more conducive to ceasefire talks if Ukraine does withdraw from Russia? Or should Ukraine try now to bring whatever it can hold in Kursk to the negotiating table, if it can get there?
My own feeling is that Zelensky's motive in pushing his forces into Russia, invading that part of Russia, holding the territory, was to give themselves a card in the negotiations, a bargaining counter in the negotiations, that he could bargain a pullout from Kursk against something else that he needed from Putin. And it looks to me like Putin is determined to take that bargaining chip away from him by completing the operation to push out the Ukrainian forces to recover the Russian territory and therefore take that off the table. And I think that's part of why he is playing for time in this initial negotiation. He wants to get that military operation completed, hence his spectacle of arriving there in military uniform a couple of days ago. I think, therefore, that probably Zelensky's gamble in pushing that operation forward is failing. It did put the Russians under some pressure for a while, but Ukraine has not been able to hold the ground. And it looks to me like by the time any serious negotiation gets going, the incursion into the Kursk area will be over. So I don't think he will any longer hold that bargaining card.
And he's talking about Trump and the psychology and around everything that's been going on. And he opens up in talking about Trump's promise to sort the whole issue out in Ukraine within 24 hours of him taking office. But he says, Trump's team now are saying, oh, that was just a sarcastic throwaway comment. And how many of Donald Trump's promises are sarcastic and throwaway comments? But we are in the 100-day line now, because not long after he got in, Trump's team changed the timeline, the goalposts to 100 days. And I think that's what Donald Trump is pushing forward to. But Lord Ricketts goes in and looks at Trump's psychology to this, and he says that Trump wants something out of it. He just wants to be able to hang his hat on and say, I've done something, I've achieved something, I've got a peace deal. He doesn't care about the detail of that deal. The sort of ceasefire that comes in, he wants there to be a ceasefire. It's a ceasefire that could only last days. Trump doesn't care. He just wants the tick box. I've got a ceasefire. And Lord Ricketts' reading of Trump, and he's had to deal with him in the past, I believe, is that Trump's impatience will dominate where this is going to go. And that impatience could turn around into him either turning on Putin, turning on Zelensky again. But I think President Zelensky is playing both sides very well. And the latest phone call with Donald Trump, the readout from both sides came very well. Or it could end up in Donald Trump getting bored with all of it and withdrawing completely, and withdrawing support for Ukraine, and withdrawing from negotiating with Vladimir Putin, and saying, Europe and the rest of the world, get on with it. In